Association. I'm very happy to welcome you all to this evening's online talk show featuring Tabitha Liburd. First, I would like to say a few words about our association. The Tamil Nadu Mediators and Conciliators Association is a non-profit organization that was formed in the year 2005 with the objective of promoting mediation and exchanging information on mediation and other ADR methods. In order to understand and learn about community and court mediation in different countries, our association has been organizing a series of online talk shows featuring mediators from different countries. This evening, we have with us Ms. Tabitha Liburd. She's from Guyana in the Caribbean, and she's been working as an attorney since 1994 and a mediator since 2007. She works as a senior legal administrator and conflict management strategist. She has been living in Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee in the US, and in the year 2020, she had moved to Michigan. And while it's evening for us, it's morning for her over there in Michigan, and we're very happy that she's joined us this evening. A few words about Ms. Tabitha Liburd. She has over 16 plus years of experience working in highly visible public leadership roles and managing diverse teams. Tabitha understands the importance of building collaborative relationships and the difficulties and fears that professional women of faith might have while trying to build and manage thriving teams. Her extensive background in law and public service gives Tabitha perspective on the challenges brought on by litigation and other unresolved conflict leading to a breakdown in relationships. She also saw that while mediation is extremely effective, it did not always result in complete resolution of all issues. Tabitha saw that conflict management could effectively fill this gap and pursued it, earning a master's degree in conflict management at the Lipscomb University Institute for Conflict Management in Nashville, Tennessee. Tabitha founded Marshall Duke Consulting to provide conflict management solutions that go beyond just mediation, helping her clients cultivate, build, and maintain constructive relationships with colleagues, teams, and the community. Tabitha now helps professional women of faith who are overwhelmed by workplace conflict lead thriving teams with confidence and helps create peaceful and collaborative work environments. Her mission is to create a platform where professionals can learn, support, connect, and grow through constructive and collaborative discussions on conflicts. Its overarching purpose is to help members resolve conflict so that they can achieve new breakthroughs and live the lives they love. So we are really looking forward to hearing Tabitha Liburd speak this evening. I would now invite Tabitha Liburd to take the floor.
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate being here. I really believe that in life, so much of what we do, wherever we are, can be resolved if conflict can be resolved. And so a lot of what I do is helping people to understand first what conflict is, and then after that, to use conflict management concepts and strategies to improve our interactions. And when his friend came to visit, his friend is also male and from the Caribbean. And I told a friend, a bird laid the eggs and they have the nest there. His friend went outside, and what his friend did was characteristic of his self and his own culture. His friend went to the nest and he pulled the bird's tail so that the bird jumped out of the nest, and then he took a picture. Again, I was surprised. I was like, my first reaction as a woman was, no, 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 leave the bird, don't pull the net, don't pull the tail. And then another time, our 4-year-old goddaughter came. And when she came to visit, my husband took her and showed her the nest, and he lifted her up to look at it. And she did what any 4-year-old would do initially. She put her hand and tried to grab the eggs. And when she put her hand and tried to grab the eggs, then he had to pull her back quickly before she took the eggs out and she broke them. And so in reflecting on that, I realized just in my own little ecosystem here, that how we react in situations is determined by so many variables. Our gender. As a woman, we, in our minds, are usually nurturers and caretakers. And so as a woman, I was excited to see the nest, and I was just looking at the nest, looking at the birds, watching them come and go, and waiting for the babies to come. My husband and his friend, as males, grew up playing with birds and teasing them, and so that was their initial reaction. And the baby did what any 4-year-old would do, just try to grab things because that's what babies do. So our gender, our upbringing, our culture, our age, and our life experiences often determine how we react in situations. And the same way we react instinctively to situations, we also react instinctively to conflict, which is a really, really normal part of life. And it's essential. When we think of teams trying to meet a deadline in the home, at work, in court, wherever we are, we understand what they bring to the table. Because wherever we are and whoever we're dealing with, this is what we bring to the table. Our gender, our culture, our upbringing, our age, our life experiences. And all of these form part of the schema that we use when we filter what is happening. And so we as professionals in conflict resolution, in conflict management, we really have to look at the schema, look at our schema before we even get into mediation. Something like a body scan, something like an emotional scan, so that we separate what we are doing as a mediator and we enter into the arena as a neutral, and not necessarily as a person who is frustrated because we have not paid all of the bills that we needed to pay, frustrated because the kids have not been doing well in school, frustrated because we've not been able to do the repairs, frustrated because the spouse and us have our own issues that may or may not be conflict. And so we as neutrals, our first and instinctive reaction should be to look at ourselves and to view ourselves so that it's almost like if you are going to look at something, the first thing we do is clean the lens. And so in looking at ourselves and scanning what we are about before we even enter mediation, we are really cleaning our lens so that when we put them on and we look at the situation that we're ready to mediate, then we are well able to enter into that situation as a neutral, knowing that conflict is inevitable and it's bound to happen. And as we throw ourselves into mediation and conflict management, my encouragement is for us to also share the positive outcomes. Sometimes at the start of a mediation, when we are at the convening stage of a mediation, where we are communicating with the parties and we are making sure that they know where to go, what to do, this is something that we can communicate to them, so that they don't come into the mediation immediately assuming that they're here to fight each other and that they're here to argue and that this problem is way past resolution, right? If we are able to do that, if we can communicate these things to people, it's going to bolster their courage, it's going to increase their capability and bring them into the mediation with a positive mindset. That in itself is the first step. So mediation starts even before convening. If we could say to the parties before they come, look, a lot of good things come from conflict. You know, we're here because of conflict. The court has referred you, or the job has asked you to do mediation, or the union has sent you, but this is what can happen if we come into the arena and discuss this. You can be seen as an effective leader, as an effective male, as an effective female. You can be at the cutting edge of finding creative solutions and taking them back to your environment. If you could just help us to get unstuck. Right? Depending on the kind of mediation and where it is, if it is in our society, we could encourage the parties to see what can come from positive social change. If they could come and sit to the mediation table, and you can even give them examples of social change that came about from mediation. At convening, when you're communicating with them, you could also help them to see how coming to the mediation is sort of like clearing your lens to make you a better decision maker after we sit down and we have these discussions. And you can let them see how mediation sets the stage so that if there is anything that you want to apologize for, or if the other party wants to apologize for something, this is a neutral environment where we could receive apologies or exchange and come into the arena, laying the foundation for reconciliation and improved communication. So all of the positive outcomes of conflict can be communicated to the parties at the convening stage. And then even when you're making the introductions, you can refer to these things to set the foundation for people to understand it. Because conflict awareness is a process of discovery for us as mediators, even for the parties who come in. Many times they are learning new things about themselves coming to mediation. Some people might think, oh my God, how did I get here? Right? They might be feeling emotions that they've never experienced before. They might have a lot invested in the incident that brought them to mediation. If it's a family, that's the foundation of their life. If they came from court, that's something that's going to remain with them. Whatever the court decides, it's a compelling decision. It's something that you're going to have to do or else you're in contempt. And so helping them to understand that coming out of this process, you can actually begin a discovery of how you can be better. It can help you to understand the appropriate reaction or conflict response. Now, what's the appropriate reaction? The appropriate reaction is the best reaction that you can give that can contribute to peace and wholeness and to reduce or remove the conflict from the situation. Because we want to assume and we want to say to our clients when we're convening, look, I assume that you really don't like conflict. And I assume that you want to get resolved. This is why you went to the tribunal. This is why you approached the court and so on. And so it's almost like you are their coach, personal coach, before the mediation starts. Because in doing these things, you're talking them through all the things that it would help them to become enlightened, experienced, effective, knowing the appropriate way to respond to the conflict that you're in. knowing how to deconstruct situations, how to take them apart, and how to decide whether to intervene or whether not to intervene, because you can safely say to your clients, mediation clients, remember, sir, or remember, ma'am, you don't have to answer all the time. Silence is also a tool in mediation, because as mediators, we use silence as a tool. We sometimes stop, write, and look. We focus our attention on a party and we pause. So you can also be a personal coach to the clients who are coming in and talk to them and let them know that being an effective leader helps you understand when to intervene and when to leave individuals to resolve things for themselves. So this kind of preparation in the convening stage often, I find, sets the tone for success. So to my mind, convening is so much more than telling them where to come, what to bring, who can accompany them, and what to expect. Convening is a conversation with each party before the mediation that prepares them to actually mediate, and more importantly, gets them in the frame of mind to mediate. And I do believe that this is the foundation of a successful mediator. This is how you start doing the work from the beginning, so that when you come to a situation where they're coming to mediation, they've already been speaking with you, whether by email or a short call, and they are prepared. They know what it's about, they know what's going to happen, and each person also knows the benefit of this process and how it can help them show up better as an effective, enlightened, and experienced leader. Because many times people approach mediation because they're involved in task conflict, which could be disputes about work assignments. It could be disputes about resources and how they're shared. It could be disputes about policies. However, as a mediator, the invitation always is to look behind the conflict in that convening stage and look deeper, because a task conflict can be deeper and more complex than it initially shows up when they present for mediation, or when you get those files or the notes with the referral. Sometimes a simple argument can have deeper roots in anger, in rivalry, in shame, in things that people have not expressed, the parties have not expressed to each other, because many times our egos prevent us from being very transparent. And so you as a mediator can touch on that emotion and try to lift that veil of conflict and go beneath it during the convening stage or in caucus. When you caucus, you can look someone in the eye and say, how does this make you feel? Or when did it happen? How did you feel? And did you say anything? Did you tell the other party how it made you feel? Because many times we are not there for the conflict. We're really there because of the unhealed hurt that has led us to express a certain behavior. And that behavior led to conflict. What I think, what I feel, and what I do. That triangle is many times what brings us to conflict. And so if we as mediators are able to interrupt that triangle, so in the convening stage or in caucus, we are actually we are trying to get to the thoughts of the client, what I think. If we could get to the thoughts, we could help them to determine what they say and what they do in mediation. Maybe we can't get to the thought, but we can talk about what you're saying and start as a basis. And maybe if we start to work with them on what they're saying, it can affect what they're doing. And maybe we've not had a chance to get to the thought and to what they've said. But as mediators, we still can talk about what you did. Because in talking about what you did, we can still bring in your thoughts about it and what you said about it. So that triangle that creates conflict, what I think, what I say, what I do, if we as mediators, when we're studying a file, before we start working, we just go down to brass tacks, we put on our lenses and we look at this. That is where we can start to write down our questions, our mediator questions, and we can separate them into deeper questions that we want to ask in caucus, because we may think that the person might not be receptive to being transparent in the presence of the other party, depending on the parties or the kind of conflict. And so a good approach to resolve task conflict is usually for the leader of the team to intervene. And so if we are working in a commercial environment, we can, or even in a home environment, once we've identified with the parties who is the leader of the home, or in a commercial environment, who is the leader in the office, we can try as mediators. Because let me say this, sometimes the conflict might not stem from the people who are in the room. The conflict, when we start to diagnose, we may find out that the conflict is really in the organization. And so as mediators, we want to be creative about getting into the organization. Okay, so it might not really be the parties. There is a deeper problem that exists, and it exists in the organization. And so we want to find a way to communicate with the organization so that they understand that if we have identified task conflict, we get the leader to become skilled in getting to those underlying interests that we see as mediators and competing positions, so that we help the parties resolve that task conflict and work collaboratively in the environment. And wonderful strategies for this is to teach that leader active listening, reframing, and probing to ask deeper questions, because that leader is supposed to be the one who can affect the environment. Now, your opportunity to identify this comes at the beginning of the mediation in that convening stage when the parties are referred, because one of our questions usually is, are you the decision maker? And so when you ask that question, you are making sure that you have the person in the room that you are mediating with in the session and also coaching in caucus, right? Because this is who we are. Each of you is also a coach. When it comes to relationship conflict in mediation, it usually involves differences in personality, style, and taste, right? Look at the example with the bird outside in my yard, right? I was so happy taking pictures, telling my family members about the birds and so on. My husband and his friend were happy teasing it, and all the baby wanted to do was grab those eggs, and thank goodness she did not, right? But relationship conflict involves those differences. It could have been a conflict if I had shouted at my husband and said, leave the bird alone, right? He wouldn't know where I was coming from. Because in his culture, they tease the birds, they play with them, and so on. So many times in our environments, we're blended with people in ways that we have no control over. And everyone in the environment needs to interact as we go through routines at work. So this is something that you can share with people in convening, in caucus, which to my mind is where 50% of the mediation is and happens, because that preparation sets you up for success as a mediator when your parties are able to have a discussion, whether or not they resolve, because we don't measure our success by resolutions. We measure our success by the healthy discussions that we are able to mediate. And so many times when we find people who are in mediation that have a relationship conflict, we want to show them that a good approach to this conflict is to allow themselves to be vulnerable. And this is something that we might have to coach and model them through. We might have to show them the importance of building relationships so that we can give them examples, maybe invite them out, take a walk with them, get to know them better. Maybe at the start of a meeting, before you go into the agenda, just ask everyone how they are doing and ask how the children are and ask some questions so that you can find out you might have something in common with them. You may find out that the children like the same thing or are doing the same thing. But when you do that, in all of this, you're building relationships, because I like to say relationships are bridges. And if we show our clients that it's important to build relationships and to coach themselves to listen instead of arguing or defending. So we could say, when you come to mediation, let us come to listen. Let us come to look for bridges that we can identify. Because if we can find a bridge, we can cross it to the other side. And if we can't find a bridge, maybe we can use mediation to build a bridge that we can cross. Yes? And so task conflict, relation conflict, all those are important. And then there's also values conflict, which if we come from a multicultural society, we find that there's so many different identities. I bet if we were to all put on our cameras and say 3 things about ourselves, where we were born, where we grew up, and our family values, they would be so different. And so when you have people coming together with all of these different beliefs, it's important inside of caucus and in preparing them for mediation at the convening stage and the introduction stage to talk about these things. Why do we want to talk about them? Because we don't want them to come out in mediation in an adversarial manner. So even if it's to get the parties to see these things and actually talk about it. Many of us are not comfortable talking about politics, about religion, about values, and so on. And you may not get them to do this at mediation. However, you may get them to do this directly with you. Again, you are working as a coach in that space, because if they're not talking about this with each other, there's so much that you can still do when they're talking about these things with you, because you can start to plant valuable nuggets in these conversations. Remember, you are the person who is communicating with both parties. So you can say to one party, as you are talking about politics, religion, values, you can bring it to their attention that the other side might have another view. You may ask them if they are familiar with what's happening on the other side. It starts to open their minds to and widen their lenses to understanding that I am not the only person involved in this conflict. Ooh, there's actually someone on the other side who might be thinking. This is going to be very valuable to you when you are at the stage of generating options for settlement. So you are planting seeds at the beginning that could start helping you generate options for settlement. Because if I start to think about, if you could invite me to think about the differences that we all have, then at some point in time, you can also guide me to actually talk about what we have that is in common. And that's where our options, generating our options, comes from. And so when we have a values-based conflict, as a mediator, it's a good approach to start moving them through discussion beyond negative behavior. Our aim is not to get everybody to fall in love and live happily ever after. Our aim is to get us to honor our differences, understand our differences, and work with each other in those differences and through those differences so that we can be enlightened, experienced, and effective. And that is always something wonderful to say to your client, especially in the convening stage when you're building them up and you're explaining to them. I remember in 2008, I went to Jamaica, another island in the Caribbean. I was living in the Bahamas then, and I went to Jamaica for advanced mediation training and certification in 2008. And a part of that was mediating court referred mediations from the magistrate's court. And I remember sitting down, going to the door, and opened the door, and this little old lady and a very strong young man. And their argument was about property lines and boundaries. And their conflict was about encroaching boundaries. And things got so bad that the police charged and they were in court. And the court said, "You are neighbors. This could be mediated." And so we spent some. The court said, "I could make a decision, but you have to live next to each other after I make the decision, so try to sort it out." So there they were, and we talked about it. And it was so interesting and so touching when we moved from talking about all the things that the young man was doing that annoyed the older lady, made her disturbed. She had a certain lifestyle as an older woman. He had a certain lifestyle as a young man. And those two lifestyles were at odds with each other. And she talked about the music, she talked about the friends, she talked about the drinking, she talked about the noise. And at first, he started to get very angry. But as we moved through the mediation, it was such a beautifully emotional experience when I worked to get a shift from all the things that were wrong to all the things that were right. And I thought, what could I say? And I said, I'm going to ask one question. And I asked her, what is your first memory of him? And I called his name. And she started to talk about him as a baby and what a sweet baby he was. And when she saw him, when his parents were teaching him to walk, and I watched that young man soften. I watched his demeanor change. I watched his body language change. I watched his facial expression change as she started to talk about the baby that she saw growing up next to him. She talked about the way they shared fruits. She talked about the trees at the back and the fact that her and his parents always shared the fruits. And there was never any conflict in the way they lived. And she also spoke about the discipline that she saw his parents give him. She went full granny style on him. She said, I know that your parents would not agree with the way you're living. And that was the turnaround. When she started to talk about his behavior as a child and the way she saw him raised and nurtured, the way she lived with his parents, and the way that the hopes that his parents had for her. And so sometimes, even when the values are different, if you could bring them to a place where they start reflecting on what they have in common, at the end of that mediation, they got up and, as part of our training, we are taught to make sure we know that there's physical safety and no one can get injured and so on. So I must admit a little bit of panic when they got up and started walking together, walking towards each other. And what happened was that they hugged. And after they hugged, she said to him, "Your parents and I have been sharing fruits and food for the longest. On Sundays, you must come over for your dinner. You don't have to eat, but you can bring a bowl and I can have your Sunday dinner." The transformation when we show people what they have in common and how they can build bridges is a wonderful thing. Sometimes we want to show them that they could get a little bit of help with conflict. Sometimes we as coaches, even while we're working on a mediation, we understand that they're going to need support afterward. And so we're talking to them, showing them that they can get some skill, that they can have a facilitator, that they can use negotiation tactics, all of that in addition to what they're doing, asking a neutral person to mediate. Because one of the things that I really like to do is to invite people to look at the spectrum of conflict management and conflict resolution, because it doesn't start with mediation. Conflict resolution starts with facilitation, where someone can facilitate a discussion. And if that's not successful, then negotiation, where we actually find agreeable situations that we can work with, you can work with, and I can work with, and then leading to mediation if that doesn't work. And so this is something that I always like to share with people as we go through conflict resolution. And one of the tips that as a mediator we do, and I recommend also teaching the parties even before they come in, is reframing, which is usually learning how to reword something or how to flip it. Because I love to have people to be able to use language in mediation. One of the things that we can do as mediators is to empower parties even before they come in. So parts of this little coaching is something that we can show them so that when they come in, they understand how to speak with each other. Well, you know, maybe you don't have to say it like this, but you can say it like that. And so as part of speaking with you today and in closing, what I wanted to say to you, because I know you must be wondering, is what happened to those baby birds? Well, they grew up. This is one of them that grew up and flew off when they got to the age where they're supposed to go on about their business. They grew up and they flew off. And the lesson that I took from this situation is a lesson that I like to share with mediators, because I like to say, always remind your clients to never make a permanent decision about a temporary situation. This situation was a temporary situation. If I knew that the birds were coming for a period of time and they were moving ahead once they hatched and they grew. In the situation with when my husband came to tease them, had I become angry with him and caused conflict with him, I would have been getting angry and fussing about a temporary situation. The same if I had become upset with his friend or with the baby. And so what I always like to say as mediators, always remind your parties when they come to always be mindful, never make a permanent decision about a temporary situation. It's been an honor and a pleasure to speak with you today, and I would love to answer any questions that you would like to ask. And I would also love to hear any advice that you would like to give.
Thank you. Tabitha, for the mesmerizing talk. I call it mesmerizing because I think you had us all spellbound and transported us to another world. I definitely felt I was transported to another world. And the insights you gave us on conflict management strategies were very good. Very, very good. Thank you so much. And now the floor is open for questions because we've overshot time a bit. We thought of having 15 minutes for question and answers. I'm sure all of us would love to continue listening to you for any length of time because you really hold us, as I said, the way you talk is mesmerizing and you have us all spellbound. And you have so much to share. But yes, now the floor is open for questions.
Thank you very much. It has been an honor and a pleasure. You don't know how excited I am to meet mediators who are working in this field. And just to meet people who are doing the same thing that I am doing and with so much passion. I was the registrar of the court in Cayman Islands, and things got to a point where the Chief Justice said, we need to have family court mediation. And I was able to be a part of it and to see how mediation works in the family court, in the other courts. And I find too that lawyers themselves have been studying some mediation. I want to ask a question of the mediators. In your fields, how do you find the lawyers able to support you, the attorneys and mediators? Do you find that generally they support the process? Or I'll be very transparent, do you find that they are more encouraging people to go to court and have the trials there?
See of change, whether it's the law firms or the advocates with regards to mediation. Yes, there was a lot of resistance and there was a lot of that wall, and that wall has been broken down brick by us mediators, and we have tried to also give and encourage advocacy mediations to the lawyers. And we have given them sessions where we have taught them or given a webinar or the kind of an awareness program to bring them on table with us. And now I have personally experienced the sea of change, especially in family matters and matrimonial cases. Law firms of huge standing are referring their matters to for pre-litigation mediation, which is a great step forward. India is still in teething stage, I would say, when it comes to the field of mediation. But we have actually seen a sea change, and it has been a wonderful journey. Thank you so much.
My country of birth, Guyana, they did exactly what you are describing. And what worked was educating the attorneys so that they understand this is what is going to make it better for you. This is what is going to make you successful because you both win your case. You're already retained. And if you're retained already, we may as well get the best result that we could so that everybody walks away feeling successful. But it was an uphill battle. Yeah. It was an and still is, and still is in many cases, which leads me to say that I've seen that too. I have been in the Bahamas. I was Deputy Registrar and a Master of the Supreme Court, locatory applications. And we also heard the pretrial mediations. And I have seen people come in and say, we're not going to agree on this.
So we agree to disagree.
Yeah.
But I thought you were talking about convening. That stage we generally do not do, I think convening, when you were talking, I think more of convening, that stage if we had done, I think there is a more positive result, because the lawyers, we can also talk to the lawyers. Yes. And because we have court referred mediation generally. So therefore the question of convening is not there, is absent. So I think
Yes.
that will encourage people to,
Yes.
understand the conflict and settle it also in mediation.
Yes. Yes.
So that is it.
Yes. Thank you. I agree. Even if you use the convening as a way of educating the lawyers on how successful they would be if this were to finish and how much court time and so on, you could wrap this up if we agree. Even if we don't agree everything, we might agree the interlocutory matters. We may agree part of it, and we can enter judgment for this part and then proceed on the other part.
Rani, over to you.
I am Indrani. On behalf of the Tamil Nadu Mediator and Conciliator Association, we are thankful for having consented to deliver a wonderful presentation on conflict management concept as strategies. It was indeed an inspiring of enjoyable sessions. I am sure our perspective on conflict management has been changed. We have learned a lot. Thank you very much, ma'am, for spending your time with us. I thank all the participants for having joined us today. Thank you, one and all. Thank you, everyone.